Last night I just was able to go through the entire book, a narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, and very, very exciting book, very interesting book. Seems to show the emotion that animated the North in preparation for the Civil War. He escaped to his freedom in 1845, so that is 15 years before the Civil War, and apparently becomes a big part of the abolition movement. And a very interesting book, just talking about his life as a young person and his escape from slavery. He doesn't give details about his escape from slavery so as not to hinder future escapees from slavery, but some interesting things that he talked about is that babies would be taken from their mothers within the first year. And so his memories of his mother was only that she would come from another location, maybe 6 miles away. Might have been part of the same master who had 1,000 slaves, but in any case, she wasn't on site with him. They were separated, and that was the practice at the time, probably to discourage the strength of family bonds. But she would come at night and spend time with him. He remembers her putting him to sleep, and then she would be gone well before he got out of bed, because she had to be ready to go to the field at sunup or the specific time. So she would come at night, and that stands out to me, a mother's love, that she would walk in the nighttime just to be able to get a few moments with her boy. And he believed that his father was one of the masters on the plantation, and he also believed that the great numbers of these mulattoes that were half white because a master had impregnated a female slave, that there were so many of those that the argument of Ham being judged and therefore slavery being okay was going to be ruined, because all of these babies that were born to female slaves with white fathers were automatically to become slaves, and yet they were not more than 50% Ham's descendants, even if that was a plausible argument in the least bit, which it was not. And so he talks about, as a young boy, he gets what he considers a good position. He has a master that seems to care about him and protect him from the older boys, but he still is a slave. And so the slave children would get just a plain linen shirt, and that's all they would wear, just a small plain linen shirt that would just go down far enough to cover their nudity. And so at night he was so cold, because this is Maryland, he's a slave in Maryland, that his feet, as he's writing the book, he says he can take his pen and put it inside the cracks in his feet from when he had frostbite as a boy. And so he would have just that shirt, and then sometimes he said he would steal, I believe, a corn sack, and he put that over his head rather than over his feet. And so again, he gets another good opportunity. He is able to go to Baltimore, and he's going to go to Baltimore. He's going to take care of a young boy. That's going to be his job, his responsibility. The mistress takes an interest in him, teaches him the ABCs, and the master of the house finds out and forbids it. And in forbidding it, he explains to the mistress that a slave who is educated is going to become unsatisfied with their role in slavery and is going to become unmanageable and may yearn for freedom. And he hears that and decides that that is exactly what he wants, and he's going to do what it takes to get educated. And so he finds other boys there in Baltimore, white boys, and he would get them to teach their lessons, share their books with them. He would, later on, I believe it was, he would challenge a white boy and say, I know as much as you do as far as letters. And he would write down the few letters that he had and say, see, beat that. And then when they'd write down, he would learn what they wrote down. And he would later take the charge that he had, the little boy of the house. He went to school, and so he would sneak his books and he wrote down all the lessons that his charge would get. He would go back behind him and do them as well. And so he taught himself to read this way. So there's a death, and so the master dies. The master over the 1,000 slaves, or the larger group, dies. He gets sent back to be valued like cattle, and there's a son and there's a daughter, and he's really worried about going to the son. He's glad he ends up going with the daughter, but I believe the daughter's husband just does not know how to manage a plantation or to make value of slaves, and so it's difficult. He gets farmed out. He gets moved around different places. He finally ends up with a prominent Methodist man who is known for breaking slaves, and he uses the N-word. That's what he's famous for. He's famous for breaking slaves, and so he's considered a good Methodist, but he has no respect. Obviously, Frederick Douglass has no respect for this man's religion, and talks specifically about how he doesn't have enough money to buy a slave himself, but he gets known for breaking slaves, and so he gets to have a slave for a year in order to train them, and he encourages adultery by buying one slave and then taking in a male slave for a year and forcing them to sleep together in a small confined area for a year, and then at the end of that she's pregnant with twins, and so he has no respect for his Christian faith. The overseers seem to have the worst reputation. In order to be a good overseer, you had to be mean and cruel, and many times he talks about an overseer whipping or beating slaves for the slightest infraction, just so that they would continue in fear. He tells at least 3 stories where he was near death, and he believes that God worked providentially that he not lose his life. An accident with oxen in a cart that he didn't know what to do, and the oxen weren't trained very well. And then specifically, again, he's soaking up whatever he can read, whenever he can read it. He hears about this term abolitionist. He doesn't know what it means. He knows that it's something that they don't want him to know about. He knows better than to ask one of the slave holders what an abolitionist is, and so he is yearning for freedom. As he reads and he sees these things, he wants freedom, and it's at different points he wishes he could die rather than continue as a slave. He goes out. He's able to look on, I believe, the Chesapeake Bay, and he sees all these sailboats, and he's so envious that he could get on the sailboat and go out. At one point, when he comes back from Baltimore, he pays attention to which direction the boats go that we're going to Philadelphia, and he keeps that inside his mind so that one day he can try to get there. He was having one of the providences that he had where his life was saved is that he stood up to a master, and so he stood up to the master. The master threatened to kill him, and it was going to be bad. The master injured him. He was sick. He wasn't able to work, and the master attacked him, kicked him in the ribs twice, and then broke his hit him in the head, and he was bleeding bad. He walks back to his real owner's house, not the one that's famous for breaking the slaves. He leaves there to go back to his master's house, and that master says, "Oh no, he's not going to kill you. You need to go back. You're his for the year. That's the deal that we've made." And so he goes back, and that master another time goes to whip him, to beat him up, and he fights that master back. And providentially, for some reason, that man does not take him and turn him into the constable for a public whipping. He doesn't end up being killed or punished for striking a white master, but he fought with that master, got the best of him for a couple hours. The master pretends like he's punished him for 2 hours, but the master's bleeding and he's not. And the only reason he can think of the master didn't turn him in, didn't get him hung, was that he was known for breaking slaves, and if he asked for help with this slave, it would hurt his reputation. But in any case, God worked it out that he was able to make it through that. He was upset. He had a Bible study that was going on, and they were learning to read the New Testament, and that was broken up with sticks. Same principle. They did not want the slaves to be educated. He learned shipbuilding trade. He learned how to do some iron work and do sealing of ships, and he was making the owner at the time a good profit for that. He was making good money, and so he'd make like $6 in a week, and so the master would give him 6 cents, and he saw that as an indication that the master understood that really that was his money that he had earned, and the 6 cents to him was only an insult. And so he gets the privilege of making his own work arrangements, and he has to pay $6 a week to his owner, and then he's able to put some of the other money away. And he goes to a camp meeting, which is probably a Methodist thing, probably a religious thing, and because he was out further than the master had expected, he loses the privilege of earning his own money. And so the next week he doesn't go and work, and the master looks for the $6 at the end of the week, and he says, "I don't have any money. I didn't work." And so the owner says he's going to find work for him, but he finds work on his own, and he begins making his plans and putting away a few pennies every week to be prepared to strike out for his freedom. And so when he got to New York, he left there quickly, felt that he was still in danger of being shipped back to the South, made it to New Bedford, and for some reason that was a place where he felt like he was safe, and he is not able to be a shipbuilder. Prejudice there would not allow him to use his trade that he had learned, and he actually had gotten beaten up back in Baltimore as a shipbuilder because they were threatened by his skill and his ability, and they didn't want him there. They didn't want to lose their jobs. But he was grateful in New Bedford for just the fact to work, the ability to work, and whatever work he could do. And he expected when he got there to see poor people. He thought that prosperity came from slavery. And so it was his understanding that everyone in the North would be poor because they didn't have slaves. So when he got to New Bedford, he was very pleased to see people, like a black man that had been free for 6 years, living in a home, and he was able to bring his wife up there, and he was just pleased to see that there were people that ate at finer tables than any of the masters he had seen in the South, and people that were doing well, that were willing to work with their own hands, and not just the plantation owners that would not work and would gain their prosperity from the work of the slaves. Thanks for taking the time to watch. We are a country that's been through a lot of good and bad, and if you take the time to listen to this, it can't be more than 3 hours or so. You'll be glad that you did.